We're all here today for Preston Bowman. He's going to be talking about a communication formula that reaches the heart of donors. And I'm going to do a quick introduction for Preston. This is that AI picture that I think you were talking about.
No, actually, it's
Oh,
not.
that
But
this one is okay. Okay, so
I play
I
with
pulled.
AI a lot. I'm desperate to make myself look better.
Well, I pulled this. I don't remember where I pulled this one from, but I thought it looked close enough that I was like, I'm going to use this one just to have some fun. But Preston's been a dear friend of me personally and also professionally. He's done some story branding with our business and built our websites, and I'm actually currently going through a marketing combustion lab with him, an accelerator, and we talk business and mission and faith all the time. And I was very excited when he accepted the invitation to come be a guest speaker. And if you're, I mean, you're here, you know, the content or the topic at hand, but man, when it comes to nonprofit, everything, whether you're leading and casting a vision, whether you're in the boardroom and, you know, giving direction to the organization, or if you're interacting with donors, the words you use and the stories you tell are so important. And so Preston's going to walk us through a formula there. So Preston, thank you so much for being here. I didn't do your introduction justice, but we want to get to you and the content that you're bringing. So I'm going to hand it over to you and let's jump into it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Kent, for having me here today. I'm going to try to match myself even closer to Jake's picture. I'm going to put my glasses on
Wow,
and
there you go.
so I can see my screen a little bit better. I'll tell you something kind of interesting. Kent, you're talking about 25 years. It's 25 years for Stonecreek Consulting as well. We
Wow,
started in December of 2001. So
cool.
right there with you. Let me share my screen. And we'll get right into, let me get this so I can see everyone's faces or profile pictures. All right. So today we are here to talk about a communication formula that reaches the heart of donors. So in 20 minutes, that's the time limit I was given, you'll have a simple, powerful formula you can use to rewrite your next appeal, donation page, or thank you note, transforming donor communication from transactional to transformational. So Aaron already gave a an introduction of me, and I will just say we already talked about Stonecreek Consulting. That's my business side of the world. We're a husband-wife led marketing agency. We call ourselves a words first agency because we start with the words, we start with the messaging first. But I am also the co-founder and the board president for a nonprofit myself, Life Alliance Kansas. And so let's just dive in. There are two real enemies of donation flow. So, number one is confusion. Now, this is a universal problem, whether it is nonprofits or businesses, it is putting out confusing messaging into the world. And we don't even realize we're doing it. We are we're in the weeds day to day. We talk about our organizations, we talk about our businesses um, all the time, every day, and we have lost the ability to hear what the hearer is hearing and whether the message is clear for them or not. But if they don't understand, they won't act. If they don't have a clear picture, not just of what you do, but what their money will do, they're not going to give. They're not going to act. So donor messaging often fails for this simple reason. It's unclear who it's for, what's at stake, or even what action to take. Sometimes in soliciting donations, we're actually really bad at saying, Here's the action I want you to take next. And when donors feel confused, they default to inaction. But that's just the first part of the problem. The second part of the problem, I'm sorry, I skipped to this part. Clarity is charitable. When you use clear communication, it's actually an act of respect. When you make it easy for donors to understand their impact, you honor their trust and time. All right, the second problem is disconnection. If they don't feel connected, they're not going to act. They're not going to donate. Often donor messaging fails to create a strong enough emotional connection because the need explained is too general. When donors don't feel personally and emotionally connected, they default to inaction. It's a very interesting fact. We believe our emotions over facts. Think about that. We believe our emotions over facts. A lot of times when we're talking to donors, we want to dive into the numbers. We want to dive into the facts of who all we helped, our annual report. We want to talk about that, and we bypass the emotion. But we believe emotion before we believe facts. So I want to talk about the perfect story formula. So I don't know how familiar you might be with StoryBrand. It came from a book written by Donald Miller called Building a StoryBrand. And it takes the formula of the perfect story, which we see in movies. In fact, while I walk you through this, if you'll think about either Karate Kid or the 1976 first film in the Star Wars movies, or Lord of the Rings, if you think about one of those as I go through this formula, you'll easily see how this formula is used in great storytelling in movies. And Donald Miller said, what happens if we overlay this over business? And the fact is, when we use story to communicate, we go right to the heart, and we bypass the objections of the brain. And we make what we're trying to communicate accessible and understandable. So here's the formula that is part of StoryBrand. It's a 7-part framework that starts with a character, the person who actually turns out to be the hero of the whole story, and what it is that they want. What are they looking for? Now, if you think of those 3 movie examples I gave you, the heroes of those stories are weak. You've got Frodo, you've got Daniel LaRusso, and you've got Luke Skywalker. They're weak characters in the beginning, and they have something they're seeking or they want or they desire, but they have a problem. They have a villain that comes up against them. And then they meet a guide who understands their fear, understands the challenge they're against, and presents them with a plan to follow to overcome that villain or that problem. And then the guide actually calls them to act on the plan. Now they stand at a crossroads. They face a decision. And that decision, whether they choose to act on the plan that the guide has provided them to overcome their villain, if they choose to act on it, they encounter a series of successes. And if they don't, then it ends in disaster. And pretty much every great story told on the screen, they clearly put in front of you the disaster that could happen, and eventually the success is always the end result. And the part that's not shown on the screen here is there is a transformation in that original character where they become the hero. They become what they were not in the beginning. So if you think about Luke Skywalker and you think about Frodo and you think about Daniel LaRusso and you think about them at the end of the story, they are dramatically different than they were at the beginning. So this formula is a beautiful way to craft any message that you want to convey. Yet for some reason in our business/nonprofit lives, we tend to think the best way to convey information is through bullet points. And it's not. It's through story. Here's what I want you to understand, and this is the key to using the 7-part framework. The old approach and the default approach for most organizations is to put themselves in the place of the hero. Now, remember what I told you, what I pointed out about Luke and Daniel and Frodo. They're weak. You don't want to be in the place of the hero. What you want is you want to be in the place of the guide. You want to put your donor, your potential donor, actually in the place of the hero. And we're going to see how this unfolds. When you position the nonprofit as the hero, the donor just becomes a passive funder. But when you make the donor the hero, giving transforms into identity and purpose, a meaningful choice rather than a transaction. So the wrong way to do it is, as a nonprofit, we do this. We need you to help us. The better way is, you could accomplish this, and we would like to guide you to do that. So the perfect donor pitch formula. We're actually going to do this by telling 2 stories in a row. That's the secret to this formula. So we're going to take the 7 parts of the framework and we're going to do it twice. The first story you're going to tell is going to grab their attention and pull on their heart, something that they really already care about, and you're going to tap into that. And the second story is going to be them in the story. They're going to see their own story unfold with themselves as the guide helping the needy character. So we're going to start with a heart-grabbing story, a true case study from your own files, and then we're going to walk them through a story that places the donor into the story where they make a difference. So the first story is the sample. The need is the primary character or the hero, and the donor is the guide. And in the second story, I call it the reversal. The donor now is the primary character or hero, and you, the nonprofit, are the guide. If this all seems confusing, let's walk through an example. So story 1, you are giving them a sample. You're going to use the 7-part framework to tell a true story of one of your own beneficiaries, a deeply moving story that demonstrates the difference your organization makes. But remember, don't be the hero, be the guide. So I just made up an example here. We're going to walk through the 7 parts, and I'm giving you just brief snippets that you would fill in and flesh out a little bit. So we start with a character. Let me tell you about little Jared. Jared was in a terrible situation, and you go on to explain the situation. A donor named Sarah, someone just like you, gave. And we were able to offer Jared a way out. Sarah heard about the need at, name the event, or in a conversation just like this one. and Jared's life changed. And then describe that change. Describe the success that now Jared is seeing. And then say, if Sarah had not given, Jared would still be, and lay out the failure side of things. Where would Jared's life be if he had not been helped? And it would likely be even worse than the condition he was in originally. Now, you notice in this story, you, the nonprofit, are not prominently featured. Your focus is on who it is that you serve in a very specific case, and how a donor came along and made the difference. That's the first story. And you're just going to tell it just like a story, but you're going to follow that framework. Then you're going to go to the second story, the reversal. So now you're going to use the 7-part framework to tell a story where the potential donor is the hero, and a story that allows them to see themselves in this story and you as the guide. So let's look at it. So you would flow right from telling that first story, and you would say, I know you have a heart for the Jareds in Kansas City, in Wichita, wherever it is that you serve. But making a difference sometimes feels hard or out of reach. Now, this might not be the right line for you. This might not be the obstacle that your donors typically feel. But you want to tap into that. You want to find what is it that makes them hesitate to donate. And that is the problem or the villain. And you're going to state that clearly. Then you're going to say, that's why we exist. We've helped many donors like you make a lasting difference. It's incredibly simple to help other Jareds. And then describe very detailed, what is the process to donate? If it is, if it's fill out this card, if it's, I've got a QR code right here on my phone. You'd scan this code and enter your initial information. Then someone will contact. Whatever your process is, but be very specific, very clear. And if your process is more than 3 steps, condense it to 3 steps. You always want 3 steps in this part because it makes it feel doable. All right? So it's incredibly simple to help other Jareds. You just name the plan. Would you help by, this needs editing. Would you help by taking that first step? So this is your calling them to act on the plan. Would you help by taking that first step? Now don't stop there. Keep talking. If you do, there is a Jared or a Jacqueline that in just a few days could and describe the transformation. There's the success, and here's the failure. Without your support, many Jareds in Kansas City will remain in and describe the terrible situation. Then, just be quiet. Now, this can be really hard because our natural inclination is to fill the gap. And that's the very thing you're going to take advantage of because they want to fill the gap too. So you have asked the question already. And they won't let the silence go very long. They will be compelled to end the awkwardness. Let's go back and look at this story. I know you have a heart for the Jareds in Kansas City, but making any kind of difference feels too hard or out of reach. That's why we exist. We have helped many donors like you make a lasting difference in this need. It's incredibly simple to help other Jareds. You just, step one. Would you help today by taking that first step? If you do, there's a Jared or a Jacqueline that in just a few days could be helped in such and such a way. Without your support, many Jareds of Kansas City will remain in this terrible situation.
Wow.
And they will respond. We have shared a very specific story that shows how someone you've helped has been helped by a donor. And now we've put them in the story and we're waiting for their response. We did talk about emotion and numbers, and I just want to point out that you can share specific numbers, outcomes, and proof after you've established empathy, after you've tapped into the emotion, and if they ask. It may never be necessary. But don't jump to the numbers first. The data should support the story. It doesn't replace the human emotional connection. And an ethical reminder, never use a fake story. It's unethical. And second, most people can see through a fake story. You know, it's obviously, if you need to change the name of a sensitive story, you can certainly do that. But the story should be real. All right, I'm going to recap. You can do this. You can do this. So first, go find a powerful beneficiary story. Something that pulls on your own emotions. Something you're really proud of your organization over because it made such an impact. And make sure the story is not an outlier, that it doesn't match your typical work. Like, this was unusual. We don't normally do this, but wow, was it amazing. Make sure it matches your typical work. Then use the 7-part framework to construct the exact words you'll use to tell that first story. And memorize it. Memorize it and use it everywhere. Next, formulate the second story using the 7-part framework and how you'll craft it every time you're talking to a potential donor. And then go try it. You may be looking at what I'm talking about today and going, this is very outside of my comfort zone. This is not how we normally talk to donors. I don't know about this. I would encourage you to be bold. Go try it and watch the difference. This framework has been proven for over a decade now to connect to people's hearts in a way that the way we typically talk doesn't. And a note, if they say, yes, I want to give, I want to donate, immediately reinforce their decision. That is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Because you are giving, kids like Jared will be able to. Don't just say thank you, but go back to the story and reinforce what their donation is going to do. And the reason for this is because buyer's remorse is real, even in a donation situation. If I have just agreed to let go of some of my money, there is always this little nagging thing in the back of my head that says, was I just like twisted into doing that? Was that a good choice? And you want to answer that, and you want to kick that buyer's remorse to the curb immediately by assuring them that their gift is going to make a difference. And you do that by going back to the story. All right. My challenge for you today. This formula works because it taps into the heart. It's about clarity and it's about connection. So here's my challenge for you today. Before the day ends, set aside 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, and find your compelling sample story and format it in the 7 parts of the framework. And if you're like, I can't remember the 7 parts, first of all, I'll provide the slide deck to the Stromans. And you can go out and you can Google StoryBrand framework and bypass the text responses. I mean, like the links to websites. Click the image search, StoryBrand framework, and look at the results of the image search. And you're going to see dozens, maybe hundreds of those 7 circles. And you could just use that. 10 minutes. Just put 10 minutes into it today. And then test it. Go share that story. You're just doing the first one, the compelling story. And then if you want, only if you have completed these 2 tasks, because that tells me you're serious. If you complete those 2 tasks, you can schedule some time with me for a 15-minute review. And this is not a, swing back around and try to sell you something else. I want to help you. So if you need some help or you just want somebody to review what you've put together, I'd love to do that with you. And so here's my information again. Jot down my email address here and connect with me. And that is my presentation.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing that, Preston. Let's, in a moment, I'm going to ask everyone's top takeaway. But before we get there, let's just do some initial Q&R, questions and response. So if anyone on the call has a question you'd like to throw out to Preston, that's Q&R. So if you don't have the answer, that's okay. He probably will, but we'll certainly give a response. But feel free to take yourself off mute or drop it in the chat. But any questions for Preston right now? Oh, and
Jake, you're muted, Jake.
Yeah.
I'll ask one that I think this is a great strategy, great way to formulate. Makes total sense to me. I think how do you recommend it strikes me that we ought to tread a little carefully in describing the negative, the choice not to act, so as not to blame the potential donor for the problems in society or for the issues that we're bringing up, right? Like if you don't, these bad things will happen feels pretty heavy to me if we don't approach that carefully. Do you have any advice for thinking about that?
Yes, and you do bring up a great point. And you certainly should, I would say, first of all, just be intuitive about the situation that you're in and the person you're talking to. And you could certainly reword that so it's less pointed, and just say something to the effect of, without donations, we are unable to help Jared's, or something like that, where it's a little less pointed. But that's a really a great point. You certainly don't want to offend, and there is certainly this balancing line between the coercion versus tugging on the heartstrings and the emotion. And so the second they feel coercion, which is kind of what you're pointing out here, the wall goes up, right? So I think yes, you are right in that we should be a little less pointed in the failure side in the second story.
Another way to think about it is putting some of the weight on the mission. So, hey, without our mission, we can do nothing. And we can see without there. I know Jason's on the call, and he's in the human trafficking, anti-human trafficking space. And so instead of pointing it on the donor, say, hey, here's the price of inaction. Our mission doesn't move forward. There's going to be a lot of people trafficked here in Kansas City. We don't want that, but here's the result of taking action. But I think it's very wise not to put it on the individual, because then you're in that guilt trip space, and we don't want that.
Yeah. Well, Preston, I think you used the term balance, right? And I don't know who's heard this phrase, but the curse of functional politeness. And it seems like in our culture, we tend to go make things so polite that it's impotent. And so it makes it okay to not do anything. And so I really love the clarity, Preston, that you brought of here's a very clear action step. Here's what happens if you do act. Here's what happens if you don't act. But again, doing that in a very thoughtful way, Jake, like you described.
I'm going to read a question.
I know there's another question. I want to say one more thing about this. And you are totally free to disagree with me. But I think sometimes we are a little too hesitant. We're afraid that we're going to appear as impolite or coercive. And I think it is appropriate to push a little bit, to lean a little bit into, you've got to understand, without donors like you, disaster. And so I would encourage you to be willing to take a risk without being rude.
Yeah.
Because people do need to understand. So that I just want to encourage you to push a little bit into it. Yeah.
Let's jump to the next question. This one came in the chat, and it also got a second. So a great question by Joseph. He asked, you mentioned recycling stories. How often do you review your stories used? A lot of stories are similar.
Mm-hmm. So I would, if you lean into this, I would recommend that you formulate 3 stories that have slightly different nuances. Slightly, you may, depending on what you talk about, you may want to have a story of a female that was helped and a male that was helped. If you span ages, you may want to have a story of a child who was helped, a family who was helped, and an adult who was helped. I would recommend that you come up with 3 different ones and choose which story you tell depending on who you're talking to. Which story do you think is going to resonate with them the most, grab at their heartstrings the most? And so that wasn't necessarily a direct answer to your question, but it sort of relieves the question in how often would you change the story? Well, if you have 3 to juggle through, then less often. And if this does become your primary way of talking to donors, then you certainly would want to try to cycle through those to the point where you're not talking to the same donor this year as last year and giving the same exact story. So hopefully that's helpful. And the fact that your stories are similar, I don't think that matters.
Yeah, for those of you executives who might be speaking in front of large groups, I think it's a good practice to notate which story you used. So if you get invited back to the conference next year, you're not using the same story. But part of it is, and if you put in the practice like Preston suggests, you're going to get good at a story. And so use it. And it may be the 10th time you say it today, but if it's the first time that person's hearing it, that's okay.
You know, I hadn't thought about this till right this moment. But our family, has supported, children through Compassion International in the past. And if you go to an event where they pass out those packets, each packet is a story, right? It's an individual story. Compassion and World Vision, these groups sort of mastered the whole art of taking the broad ask and bringing it down to an individual. But my point is, if you go to an event where they do this, the person on stage who's talking to you about what your money could do and who they are and all of that, what do? They pick up one of the packets and they talk about that child. They're doing a form of what I've taught you today. What other questions? Any others?
While you're thinking about that, I'm going to just throw this up on the screen. What's your top takeaway? So we like to just take notice and celebrate if there's any immediate application. Hey, I'm going to practice this story. I'm going to write this down. We like to see those in the comments. So be putting down what your top takeaway is. And then I'm going to do a little bonus here because I think Preston's the only one who's attended the Asking Academy who's in the live chat today. But we talk about basically a report that you fill out after you meet with the donor. So where the conversations we took, what are the next steps, some of the details. And that's another good place just to make a note. Hey, I used the story about Johnny. So next time I'll use a different, I'll tell a story about Mark, but going back to that earlier question, should we recycle stories and whatnot? You're not going to remember. So any ways you can mark those down and keep track of them are helpful. But
hey, I've got a top takeaway.
Yeah, sure.
Preston, I love the clarity that you brought to assigning the role of the hero and the guide, and how we typically misalign those. So for me, that's my top takeaway is to be very thoughtful and strategic and clear in each of those roles. Thank you.
Great to hear, Ken. Thank you.
Yeah, we got another one in the comments. We're in the phase of all staff being on the same page and creating a story or experiencing when approaching donors. So making them the hero and the guide is brilliant. I'm excited to share that with my staff.
Awesome, Stephanie. Thank you. Very good. I see takeaway of make the donor the hero. So kind of a consistent theme here. And I'm reading the comments here too.
Yeah. I know the hero journey is a strategy, but we struggle with communicating the downside of inaction and describing the outcome of inaction. Has me thinking, man, that's such a good one. And Preston, I'm glad you kind of gave us the challenge to be courageous and push it there. But I think it does a good job of displaying mission relevance. Because if there's not a problem and we don't exist, maybe we shouldn't exist. But if we're actually addressing a real problem in humanity today, people need to know about it. And not that money changes everything, but there's definitely a connection between donations coming in and mission fulfillment, and that's okay to communicate, and it should be
Mm-hmm. Aaron, you and Kent could speak to this far more than I could, but it seems to me that we have far too many organizations who, when they ask for money, apologize for asking for money.
Yeah, for sure.
And I really want to encourage everyone here. You get to the end of the story and you do paint what failure looks like, and you don't apologize. Don't say, I know this may not be a good fit for you. Let them tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let them tell you that.
Okay, I'm going to throw a couple things up on the screen here. In the same vein as your story for donors, if you're thinking about a campaign, you might want to consider just doing a little pre-check. There are lots of dynamics that go into a campaign, whether it's capital campaign or fundraising campaign. But if you want to get a little pre-check, we have a free resource for you. Feel free to hit that QR code, and I might even drop a link in the chat if you just want to click on that and do it right now. It's in there, but just a way to make sure you're not skipping any steps or jumping into phases prematurely. So it's a nice readiness resource for you. And then what are we doing next week for the 47-minute webinar?
Next month.
Next month.
Not next week. You're making me nervous.
Next week, next month. Yes. It'll be in March 10th. Actually, yeah, a month from today. Fundraising or sales, what's the difference? We have a lot of people who, when they're looking to hire a development person, they think of sales. We have a lot of people who go from sales into development, fundraising, and try to treat it the same. And so we're going to address that dynamic and talk about the difference, because there is one. And if some people make that transition well and some people don't. So that's the topic for next month. And last but not least, I mentioned it by name, but the Asking Academy. It's a pretty immersive 5-month program, has lots of elements to it, specifically a summit that's 2 days on site on asking for gifts. We actually use, we practice some story and how we communicate our message, and specifically around major and mega gifts. How do we sit down with high net worth individuals and just have a conversation around fundraising? Staff comes to this, board comes to this, volunteers come to this. So if that's something we need to be talking about, it's there. What did Preston just show? You show something on this? Oh yeah, Preston's a graduate of the Asking Academy. So he's been there. He can speak to that. But just something
Phenomenal.
to
Phenomenal.
throw up there. There's one later this month. It's too late to register for that. Our next one will be in June, summiting in June. So that's something we need to talk about. Let's do it. But with that, Preston, we want to thank you so much for investing in our community today, sharing your wisdom. Thank you.
Really happy to do it.
Exceptional.
Thank you.
And I would encourage people. I didn't know Preston was going to do this, but he offered that 15 minutes. If you do the steps 1 and 2, that 15 minutes is worth its weight in gold. So I would encourage you to take advantage of that. Connect with Preston on LinkedIn. And if you're not sure how to get a hold of him, if you didn't write down his email, feel free to follow up with me, and I'd love to connect you guys. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Preston. And we wish you the best in your fundraising endeavors. God bless.
See you next month.
Bye.
Bye now.